From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here on a Thursday, and we certainly have a busy show on tap for you this morning. I invite you to join in the conversation both on the Plus, News Channel 5 Plus right now on your television set, or we're also streaming live on Facebook at newschannel5.com. We'll take phone calls, try to get to some of your comments. And of course, we're talking in the aftermath of what happened yesterday in Washington, D.C. through the evening and into what we can expect for today as everything's developed along that front. We have a good lineup of guests this morning. And again, you're entitled to listen and participate as well. I'll introduce to them in a moment, our first guest, but I'll tell you the lineup of what we have. Our first guest will be John Weil, MTSU political science professor, for a segment of the program. After that, we'll be joined by Tennessee U.S. Representative Jim Cooper from Washington, D.C. And at one point yesterday, Phil Williams here at News Channel 5 interviewed him while he and his staff were locked in his office while what was happening in the hallways was going on. We'll talk to him about the very latest and get his take on things. And then we'll wrap up the program with constitutional attorney David Rabin, a well-respected local attorney here who can talk about some of the legalities of what we see happening and where we go from here moving forward. So it should be a good program. Hopefully we can answer some questions for you. And throughout the program as well, we'll be running video of what happened yesterday. And I know many of you are up to speed on all of that. But let's get more into the details this morning with Professor John Weil. Good morning to you, sir. Thanks for joining us. Yesterday morning, you were on the program with us as we talked about what we thought would be a historic day. I think neither of us had any idea it was going to get to this point.
You know, you asked me yesterday what could happen, and I said, well, there's always, we'll probably get more pardons. There's always a possibility that Trump will resign, turn it over to Pence, and hope that Pence will pardon him. But today there is discussion of another possible impeachment, or I think more likely an invocation of the 25th Amendment.
Let me ask you this, because both of us, maybe we, missed it a bit. Maybe the national media outside of D.C. missed it a bit. But, for weeks now, we've heard what the president was saying, and we saw that there was more and more of his supporters gathering over the past 24 to 48 hours. We saw the crowd outside of the Capitol. And I just have to wonder, I know this will be a question asked today, where was the security? Where was the security? And it just seemed like they were woefully unprepared.
I mean, the only explanation that I know is that the routine jobs that the security for the Capitol do are, watching people as they come through metal detectors, and then maybe they weren't just prepared for it. But, the whole reason that we have the District of Columbia is so that federal authorities will be in charge of being able to protect themselves. In the government prior to the one we have now under the Articles of Confederation, Congress actually had to move to other cities because of threats that that unpaid militiamen were going to come and storm the building. And lo and behold, we get that even when we're supposed to have federal control over the jurisdiction.
And that's why the whole idea was creating Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, so it would be separate from states so that you wouldn't have that threat of a state militia maybe threatening. But I guess the idea back then was that you would never have thought that the president himself would have been the one, perhaps egging on the protesters to come and do what they did.
No, that's right. The major, the incitement for this is squarely with the president. I was so pleased that, I think it came late, but both U.S. senators yesterday decided that they would no longer take part in the charade that was going on in challenging the legitimacy of the election. It's over. And of course, finally we do have we have the count, both in popular vote and electoral votes. Biden is going to be our new president on the 20th, and that's it.
Yeah, and when you mention the two senators, you're talking about Senators Hagerty and Blackburn of Tennessee, who had signed on. And certainly a lot of the Tennessee, I think a total of 6 senators still wanted to challenge the results, but that moved past quickly, and there was not much of the delay that we thought there would be. But the 2 Tennessee senators did say, no, after this, we're not going to challenge it. And I think there was a lot of pressure after what they saw happened.
Yeah, I think it was actually 7, but
7? Okay.
6 or 7, whatever it is. As far as I'm concerned, their names will live in infamy.
Right, and this started as a protest, became a riot. Insurrection is what many people were calling this. Can you put it a little bit in historical perspective? I guess what they were saying is the last time the Capitol was attacked in a manner like this was what? You're going back to the War of 1812? Yes.
Now there have been there were some canings within Congress in the first right before the Civil War, and remember about 6 or 7 years ago, someone trying to come in with a gun. But in terms of mass, intrusion into the White House or Capitol, last time was the War of 1812, 1814, and it was an event occurred just about a month before the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner.
Okay, let's talk about the options then moving forward right now. And we have heard from the president, who has now said, aside from saying that he had the most successful first term or one term in U.S. history, which of course is going to be very much open to debate, but he said that he is going to, go ahead with a peaceful transfer of power, though he still has to put in a line there that he's going to continue to fight for what is right. But okay, that's where he stands, and he's still president of the United States. But now there are congressmen and some senators talking, one about impeachment and two about under the 25th Amendment removal. And CBS News had been reporting that to get that done, and I didn't know this, and I've learned an awful lot, that members of his own cabinet and the vice president have to get together to do that. And from what we understand, that's been discussed, but it's not moved forward at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there aren't any really good options. 25th Amendment was primarily designed for presidents who would become physically incapacitated. I really think that we have a president who is mentally incapacitated right now. Now, whether we can get it taken care of within a week. The good thing about it is, if you could get agreement by Pence and the majority of the cabinet, they would be able to ride out to the 20th before you had to have an actual vote by Congress one way or the other. So we're almost back to the situation that we had when Lamar Alexander took over from Governor Blanton. Remember, Blanton was handing out pardons, and you had a bipartisan effort. Alexander and McWhorter and a number of others deciding we got to take, we can't endure another week of this or another couple days, and they moved his inauguration up early. I don't think we can do the inauguration, redo the date of that under the Constitution, but the 25th Amendment, I think, remains a distinct possibility.
And the way I understand that would work, perhaps, because keep in mind, I mean, it's less than 2 weeks, really. The 20th is when it's going to happen, swearing in of the new president. But if they went with the 25th Amendment, it would happen within about 4 days. It would still take some time, but 4 days, the president could appeal it. But when he appeals that challenge, during that appeal, he is no longer president. Vice President Pence would be. And so that would be for at least 20 days during the appeal. But during that appeal, he is officially no longer president. So they could remove him within about 4 days.
I'm not positive that I'm right. I've actually written an encyclopedia on amendments, so I should know this. I think if Pence and a majority of the cabinet agree, I think he's actually removed then. He has 4 days to contest it. And then after that 4 days, Congress has to act within 20 days. And, by that time, of course, the term would be over. So I think it would be relatively expeditious. The great question that this would raise would be, I think many people think that Trump is about to hand out a number of pardons to himself and his family. And would that still go through if Pence were to take over tomorrow or today? And I don't know the answer to that.
I'm looking at Facebook, and a lot of various comments, but there are some out there who appear to want to be apologists for the rioters yesterday, and talking about fake news again, and talking about how this was Antifa there. And while I would agree that there are many Trump supporters who were just as appalled as anyone else as what happened yesterday, there's been no indication, as far as I can tell, that while there may have been some interlopers there, as there probably were when we had the riots here for a separate type of issue in Nashville, interlopers, it was very clear that this was President Trump's supporters. He had been encouraging them to come out over the last several weeks. So to sit here and say, well, this was Antifa and the rabble rousers, those thousands of people, the vast, vast majority, and there's no indication otherwise, were supporters of the president.
Who wants to be in the same company as Antifa?
Right.
They're birds of a feather as far as I'm concerned, whether you're, violence from the right or violence from the left. We have a country of the rule of law. That's what constitutionalism is all about. And to me, the most distressing thing that I saw yesterday, other than the fact that, 4 people are dead, talk about fake news. You're going to go to their fake funeral, they died. But the most distressing thing I saw was people taking down apparently an American flag and putting up a Trump flag. When people take office, they don't swear to uphold the president of the United States. It's not a personal oath. That's what they did in Nazi Germany. We take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And people have got to do their jobs.
A question with regard to security again yesterday, and we touched on it earlier,
yes.
How it didn't seem to be enough. And at some point later in the game, it appeared as though it was the vice president who met with the military leaders in the National
yes.
Guard, not the president himself. And we should, hearken back when the Black Lives Matter rally happened, last year in Washington, D.C. As I recall, the president himself was all gung-ho not only to bring in the National Guard, but also the military, which they talked him back off of that. But in this case, when you have this group coming in, and a lot of people are pointing out to the contrast between the BLM rally and the number of people that were out there in security and what was there this time around, and it had to be the vice president that made the move.
Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary development. It reminds me of remember the moment we had during the Reagan presidency when Reagan had been shot and Alexander Haig came up and said, "I'm in control." Frankly, I prefer that Pence be in control right now. We need somebody with a level head. And I must say, I was watching BBC a lot last night because if we could only realize what this is doing for us in international, people all over the world are shaking their heads and wondering, what's happened to the citadel of democracy. But the headline that I liked out of the BBC was Democracy Unbowed. And they were focusing on the fact that the House and the Senate were back. They went through yesterday and they got it done. They proved that they were not going to be intimidated. But what a day to have to go through. What a lesson in civics for all of us about the importance of the rule of law.
Right. Well, and as you're correct, yesterday was going to be a historic day with the counting of all the electoral votes. And so the world was watching anyway. And then this happens during such a historic day. And we've heard people on both sides, and Republicans and Democrats, saying it's disappointing because this gives comfort to our enemies for sure. They see this and they're like, oh, well, and then others, it gives great concern to our allies.
Well, again, we have over 200 years of peaceful transition of power. Yesterday was, well, it's still, in a sense, it's unblemished in that it's still going to happen. But yesterday was, it was a total embarrassment for our country. Total embarrassment.
We just have a few moments left just to kind of talk about where we go basically from here. We know that the inauguration now is going to happen, and you saw during the riot yesterday and all that happening around the Capitol where a lot of the scaffolding that's been set up for what was going to be,
yes.
The swearing in was damaged, but it's still going to happen, of course, with social distancing. But I can only imagine what the security is going to be like during the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, I just, it's time for people to calm down. And maybe me too. If you stay up long enough,
yeah,
it's hard to stay sane. But, we have enduring institutions, and I really believe that most people who take the oath to support the Constitution take it seriously. And, as I just published an article in the Tennessean posted for me, we always had that line about now's the time for all good men and women to come to the aid of their country. This is it.
Professor, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I really do appreciate it on short notice like this, and we'll talk again, all right? Thank you again for your time.
Sounds good.
Okay, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, once we get him on the line, we'll be joined by Tennessee U.S. Congressman Jim Cooper from Washington, D.C. We heard from him yesterday. He talked to us as he and his staff were locked into his office there on the Capitol while this was all going on. We'll get an update from him on the very latest and his thoughts moving forward. So stay with us. More of your comments on Facebook and those of you on hold right after this. Stay with us.